In this segment, I wanted to talk about power from a psychological perspective or mindset, and how it affects us as individuals, and of course on a larger scale, but also how to think about power and what that means. I didn't come up with like a specific definition of power to begin this discussion, but just the concept of having the ability to control or influence others or make decisions that affect others. That's what I mean by power, in the sense that, of course, clear examples of that are things like individuals with political power or holding office, presidents, prime ministers. Individuals of that sort also include authorities like police and things like of that nature. So we need people to have responsibility and authority in some ways. So overall, I believe in making things more egalitarian, less unequal, more democratic, where everyone has a voice and a choice and can have their input heard. So let's begin there. To me, that's very important, and the United States was founded on some very wonderful principles, not always enacted, but this concept of separation of powers, balancing of powers, checks and balances are really, really important to make sure that no one individual, no one group has too much power. But so coming back to this notion that we at times need to concentrate certain types of power or decision making in certain ways. So for example, when you go on a plane, you can't have everyone have equal say in how the plane is being flown. You need a pilot and a co-pilot, and of course they coordinate with others that support them to make sure we get to our destination safely. We can't have every hand in the cockpit pulling on the levers and things, saying, well, it's a democratic process, everyone gets to decide equally what we're going to do. So there are some ways that we need to do that, to have someone have that type of power. Or even, let's say in education, you have a teacher who has some level of the power and authority of the classroom. But a few things. One is that there can be different degrees of that power. So you can have a teacher that no matter what they say, they are right, and no one can challenge them in any way. There's no place to complain to, nothing to do. Or you can have a teacher that takes the input of the students, whether we're talking about kids or adults as students, that there are checks and balances of the teachers so that they can make sure if they're doing something wrong or people think they're doing something wrong, they can file a complaint that is then transparent and things can happen. So there's different ways we can handle that. But what's important for me is when we look at these power types of structures, or when people are given some kind of power, there's some very important things to keep in mind. One is the amount of power that we give to someone. So we've had things like absolute monarchs in history, or even still, that really are the ultimate. No one can challenge or question even one individual, sometimes even more than one. And that to me is always a problem. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's just not possible. When you give power to an individual where there are no consequences, no accountability, no responsibility, no recourse for others to challenge them in any way, it brings out the worst in people. Anyone, me, you, whoever you are. When we give too much power to someone, it doesn't serve them well. It's a drug, a toxic one, that makes us act in worse ways. Even when we are anonymous and know that what we do won't be seen, or they won't know we're doing it, we do worse things. And there's a lot of research showing this, both in public settings and naturalistic type of settings, but also in research, that if you're wearing a face covering of some kind, or if you're wearing something that doesn't let people know who you are, or you're in the dark, you might shock someone more than you would if you know that people can see you. Or an interesting kind of study that shows this in a different way was they would over a period of time get in front of cars that were convertibles, and then when the light would turn green, this was done, obviously out in the field on the streets, when the light would turn green, they would not go, and they would see how long it would take for the person to honk saying like, hey, go. And they found that if the person's top was up on the convertible, so they're more concealed, they would honk more quickly than if their top was down, meaning they were more exposed. Now maybe we could also think if the top is down, they're more relaxed or other things are going on. But it can make sense to think that something is there where when we are exposed, we are less likely to take some action that might not look good, or something that looks a little bit bad or has some, makes a noise or things like that. So when we are either anonymous or when there's no consequences, it brings out the worst in us. So everyone needs to have consequences. No one is above the law. No one is above other people. We have to be very aware of how power is distributed. It is just inevitable that when we give power to few people and too much to few people, it turns into a disaster where only few people are okay and the rest are suffering. Something we've seen throughout human history and continue to see, that when we move to different types of societies, often it was many people working horribly and in really bad situations and without wealth and without basic human rights and dignity, and some very few people were the elite who got to enjoy it. So this is what I mean by I'm very much in favor of more egalitarianism, meaning that there's less inequality and things are distributed more equally in general, both resources, but also power is one of those resources, more of a social resource, but that one as well. The other thing that is so important for me when we look at something like power or authority is that as a society and as individuals, so as a society we create these types of structures, but as individuals we are aware that power should be seen as something that is utilized in service of others, not in service of ourselves. So what does that mean? In general, when we think of people who are powers, monarchs, they get to just be treated, they have this power and authority and they get treated amazingly well. They don't have to work or have certain consequences that other mere mortals and humans have. They don't have to worry about certain things that everyone has to worry about. They get the best of everything and they get praised and celebrated by others. And actually this is in some ways topical because maybe now it was 2 weeks ago, Queen Elizabeth in England had died, and I don't wish death or think that the death of anyone is meaningless. But I do think that the ways we've elevated, for example, a royal family, whatever that means, it's just something we've kind of made up, right? That their lives are more important than other people, I don't think that is a good thing. So don't wish anything bad upon any of them. But I don't think we should be elevating a family or some individuals to some kind of exalted status. This is a relic from the past, which was an unhealthy relic from the past that I think we should be doing away with, of putting people's lives as so much more superior and significant to others. Even with what's been happening, I've seen posts, and this thought came to my own mind of Mahsa Amini was killed at the age of 22 for something like showing her hair and not wear improper hijab, and that's getting some more attention now, thankfully, but so much attention was given to a woman in her 90s who died of natural causes, and this, some sadness or tragedy there. And so what does that mean about us as a society and as about people when that's the way our priorities are? We're putting significance on certain things and insignificance or not enough significance on others. So usually when we think of power and even what makes people want to be powerful is because it's going to be beneficial to them. And that's unfortunately when we create these types of structures, it brings about the wrong people wanting that type of power and authority. Because if it's like, oh, how powerful, I can do whatever I want and people will love me and I can do no wrong because even if I make a mistake, somehow it's still right and no one can even question me. This is going to bring out the most narcissistic megalomaniacs, people who are psychopaths, even who don't care about others, who just want to care about themselves, and we give them then the responsibility to take care of everyone else. It's really quite crazy. It's like saying the person you're going to bring to babysit your kids, a whole group of 20 kids, is a person who doesn't even care if anyone else gets fed. So they're just sitting in their house making sure they get fed, and your babies are, not getting changed, fed, played with, or anything. That's kind of what we do in society when we attract this type of person. It's the person that cares the least about other people that we give the power, the most power, to take care of everyone else. It really is very paradoxical. People are drawn to the power for the wrong reasons, for the selfish type of power, rather than the more genuine, to me, type of power or authority where it's in the service of others. It's in the service of some kind of greater good or some cause. The pilot is not, I'm the pilot, everyone look at me, give me attention, make me feel good. The pilot hopefully will have the mindset of, I have a responsibility to make sure everyone in this plane lands safely, and this plane lands safely, and that's my responsibility, not my power for my selfish benefit, my power and responsibility to these people for something more important, some greater good. And so, unfortunately, what we've always had and still have is power structures that it becomes about the person. When you have been given this power, you get so much with it that people are drawn to it that are not the right types of people. Now, I'd like to continue this discussion, this conversation, because it's related to, of course, what's happening in Iran. It's happening around the world in different ways. But then when power gets into the wrong hands, this is what happens. But when we have power structures that make it that the wrong hands will want that power, it's more likely that it happens. So both the structure is problematic, but then this gets exacerbated by the wrong people wanting that power, that type of power. So let's go to a commercial break, and I'll continue some of my thoughts on power and how we can make it different or think about it in a different way. All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back. So as I was discussing in the last segment about some thoughts on power, authority, and how as a society and individually we can think about these things. So very clearly to me it's important that we don't concentrate too much power in the hands of few, and when you do, whatever you do with that power has to be with checks, balances, accountability, that no one is above the law, that no one is immune to being evaluated or to have their actions be under scrutiny. And actually, when you're given more responsibility, there should be more scrutiny under that. But sometimes we see the opposite. Then how dare you question the king, the CEO, the whoever it is that's in power? But really it should be the opposite. And so this relates to this type of mindset or paradigm shift that I think is so important, that some, of course, people already hold, that power is about serving others or doing something with that power rather than it's for me. And so it's so difficult because psychologically, when we're given power and when we feel like we have that authority, when we feel like we don't have accountability and we can do whatever we want, it's like a drug. It is going to corrupt us if we're not mindful of it, if we're not aware of it. You might think, I'm a good person, I would never do these things that other people have done when they've gotten power. But if you get it, we see that humans inevitably, when we don't have that sense of accountability, even if we can say a basis of human morality. Michael Tomasello has done a lot of research on the evolution of human morality and looking at some of our primate cousins and relatives and seeing how we can try to understand the evolution of human morality. And we see that a lot of it has to do with things like accountability, like joint intentionality. We are trying to hunt together, and to hunt together, which benefits both of us, we have to work together. I have to be able to think how you think, but there's very much this sense of accountability and doing the right thing for each other. And so there could be some even basis of human morality that comes from that. And so if we then lose that sense that I have to be accountable or I have to be careful what I do, we then are going to care less about what we do, and it brings out worse sides of us where we don't mind harming and hurting others because there's no consequence for us. So we actually benefit from the consequence. So power corrupts us. And I might even touch on, as parents, you have to be mindful of that. So you have to be aware when someone gives you some position of power, or you get some kind of, and I'm not just talking about you're the president of the United States, even small types of power, that being aware of how am I wielding that power? Am I wielding it for myself or in the service of others? And that to me is really critical, because if you're not careful, you're going to start to let that power get to your head in negative ways. So how does this look like when we think of power as for me versus power for others? So let's say a teacher, I already brought up that example. The teacher can feel like, Again, they might not even consciously be aware of this, but here I am, I'm the teacher, I can do whatever I want, these kids are all under my control, I can punish them, I can, create the curriculum and grading, I can do whatever I want. If I don't like a student, I can dock them points, I can do all these unfair things because I have the power. I'm the one who is in control, and that feels quite good. By the way, another aspect of this, I just mentioned control. A big part of human anxiety, or what we experience, is not having control of so many things, which no matter what we do, we won't have control of many factors, but the more control we have, the better we feel. So we like having control. So if you're in, let's say, this classroom that I'm describing, and you have control over everything, it feels a lot better or more calming than when you don't, or when you relinquish some of that control. But so a teacher can feel like, this is great, I have the most attention, I have the eyes on me, I can control what happens. No, we're staying 2 minutes later, we're doing this, we're doing that, whatever it is, it can feel really good. And that's about the teacher. They feel good. I feel good with this. I get attention, I get control, I get to hurt people if I want to, and there's no consequences. But we can think in other end of the spectrum, the ideal that I'm trying to promote here, of thinking of your power and authority, that the best way of looking at it is serving others. We could think a teacher is, my responsibility is to teach this class, and I have the authority to run this class. And actually, I also want to make it clear, when I say this, it doesn't mean if you don't want the power. That means as a teacher you let anything happen and there's no boundaries and structure and anything like that. That actually wouldn't be serving the kids. And this is where we get into this very intricate part of the balance, is how do I utilize my power or authority in this classroom to best benefit these children and their education, and also morally and psychologically and all other ways. But I've been given this responsibility. So if we think of power as responsibility, I think that's a line from Superman, like, with great power comes great responsibility. But nonetheless, I think the concept is a very good one, that my power isn't something for me, it's something I need to now utilize to help others. So the teacher thinks, how do I create the best structure for them? Not because it feels good to me to be in control of the rules and control of what happens, but what's the best structure for these children to take care of them and to help them learn? What is the best way to push them academically? Not to punish them, not because it feels good to see that they're suffering and I can relax, but because I want them to learn, because I think that is good for them. The greater good here is their education. So how do I push them in this positive way? How do I even create consequences for behavior, potentially, that might promote the best order in this classroom for all of them, and even for those individuals to experience genuine consequences for what they do, so they might learn from those things that they're doing. So we can see it's a very different experience from, this is for me, it feels good to me. Everything the teacher is recognizing in their responsibility, or what they're trying to think of, is, how does it benefit these children? I have a responsibility to take care of these children. And then, so if you're someone who's holding political power in some way, it's not this, I get to be the president, the senator, the prime minister, and look at me and give me this attention and everyone tell me how great I am and it's so prestigious. It's, okay, I've been given a responsibility to govern in some way, whatever your role is. It's actually a responsibility, a big one, which should be at the focus of that responsibility rather than the reward or the sense that I've been given some type of title. And so I think that's why we have to be aware of how we even create these structures. I have some mindset that people who are given political power should actually not be wealthy. Often the salary for those positions are high, but not only that, usually it takes wealth, especially in the United States, to get elected. And I think that's very, very problematic. And it's a very clear corrupt part of our political system here in the United States, and of course a lot of countries, that it takes money to get elected, or with money you can get elected. So again, this is going to draw the wrong types of people. It doesn't bring the person who genuinely wants to help others and come up with laws and ways of governing that will help the most people. It's someone who wants the power. They want to feel good. They want to get the benefits of that position. So if we can shift from the mindset of power is for me versus power is for me to serve, we have a very different mindset. And I mentioned parenting, so I'll give some quick thoughts on that, something I've talked about before, because when we look at the parent parent-child relationship, it's a very imbalanced relationship in lots of ways, and some of them very good, but some of them could open up the possibilities for bad. So, especially when your child is a baby and very young, it's almost purely one-sided. You take care of them, you have ultimate responsibility to them, and they owe nothing to you. A baby is not supposed to do something for their parents. They're just a baby and they need to be taken care of. So it's very imbalanced. But even from that age, and especially as they get older, another way that things are very imbalanced is the power. As the parent, you're physically much bigger, intellectually more advanced. You have all the power and authority of determining everything that's going on in the home. The child can do very little other than resist and revolt sometimes, but they have much less influence on that. So if we look at the setup of being a parent is one that has lots of things, but one of them is that it creates this huge power type of vacuum, or I should say power dynamic, where you have so much power in the hands of the parents. And so this is why I think parents have to be very mindful of this, that we have to be aware that even though we think, oh, it's my child, of course I'm not going to abuse the power, but our tendency is to go towards abusing the power, because especially when you're in the home, who's going to question your authority? You can do whatever you want, get away with things. There's really no types of checks and balances. Sometimes parents together hopefully will do that, but again, they can even be on the same page. And so we can see it's very much set up towards a parent taking advantage of that pattern, of that power. Even I say you have to be mindful as a parent to not become a dictator, because it's very easy to be a dictator in your own home. You can order whoever you want to do whatever they want, make the rules, break the rules, whatever you want to do. No one can do anything about it. So you have to be very mindful of this. And I've seen it in therapy of what parents have done to their kids, even in working with parents, seeing these feelings bubble up. It's understandable that it's so difficult raising a child that at times you're going to turn towards this. But so we want to be very mindful of this way that the power goes to our head. And especially we can feel powerless in other aspects of our life. And then you come home and you have this ultimate power. It feels good to take control, to order things around, or, think that you can just have everything go your way. It can feel quite comforting to do that. And we have to fight against that or resist going towards that type of comfort. And so coming back to this general theme of what's going on in the world and what's going on in Iran, I think it's very clear, of course, if you ask people, they'll say that they're using their power for the good and it has some kind of religious value to them. But we can see very clearly that the people who are in power want the power for themselves more than anything. And this is, again, a breeding ground for corruption. We see it around the world, and it's not that I'd say that other governments are not corrupt in the same way. They definitely are, but we see something very ugly happening there, and something that we want to be mindful of. So for me, this is a big, big concept of what does power mean? How do we as individuals think about our personal power in different situations, in different relationships? How do we, in a more cultural and societal type of way, divide power, or who do we give power to, and what are the incentives to having power? Because often we create incentives for power that are going to draw the worst types of people to have that power. It's like you're giving the worst kind of weapon to the person who wants to kill the most people if we do it in that way. So we have to be very mindful of giving power that is supposed to help people the most to the people that want to help people the least, which is often what we are doing. So as a society, how do we think about these things? And very, very importantly, that no one should have unchecked power, that just because we think someone is so good, or they come to us telling us they're so good, or we like to feel, it's kind of like this belief in God, that someone is perfect, so this person comes and we don't need to question them at all. We don't have to worry about anything this person ever does because they're so good and moral and they can never do anything bad. The truth of the matter is, humans, we are capable of doing very, very bad things and very, very good things. And each of us is capable of that. And even if you only have seen the good of someone, it doesn't mean it's impossible for them to do bad. And especially if you put them in a bad context, they will do bad. And giving people ultimate power, giving them unchecked power, giving them absolute power, is putting them in a bad context, in the sense that they will do bad things. So it's very comforting for us at times to give power to some people and think that I don't have to worry about things anymore. I don't have to think about it because this perfect authority is going to take care of me. But that's essentially a childhood fallacy and dream. As a baby, you like to have this feeling as a child that my parents are perfect, my parents are so strong and powerful that I never have to worry about anything. You know, sometimes I think about this when a child, if you think about it, they're worried about a monster in their room, and they go to their mom and dad. And of course, there's this feeling of comfort we get from them, of security. But sometimes the monster you're imagining, if we're being realistic, there's no way your mom and dad could hang with that monster. The monster would tear them apart too. But for some reason, we have this feeling of comfort that we get from them. And that's something we're at times looking for, is this feeling that I'm perfectly safe. It's understandable, and as to our kids, we want to give them that feeling of comfort and safety, which is important. But as adults, we have to realize it doesn't actually exist. There is no perfect safety, perfect comfort. There isn't some perfect authority that if we trust in this person, they're going to always do right and never do wrong. We all have to continue thinking for ourselves and being vigilant of the truth and understanding. And we need to make sure that whoever is given power is not given absolute power, because we can't trust them absolutely, because they're human beings at the end of the day. And we create power structures that makes things more balanced, that every voice is heard, that everyone has choice in their own life, but that we don't think that we can trust someone to fully make all the decisions for us, because no one has all the answers and no one is uncorruptible. All right, that brings us to our last commercial break. We'll be right back.